December 1872, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. A ship was found sailing perfectly fine with food still on the table, clothes still in the cabins, and valuable cargo sitting untouched in the hold. But all 10 people who were supposed to be on that ship had disappeared into thin air, and nobody has ever figured out where they went or why they left. Between the Azores Islands and the coast of Portugal, Captain David Morehouse stood on the deck of his ship and watched another vessel move strangely across the water. It was December 4th, and the sea was calm. The other ship was maybe 6 miles away, moving in a weird zigzag pattern like nobody was steering it. Morehouse raised his telescope and looked closer. His stomach dropped. He knew that ship. He had eaten dinner with its captain just a few weeks ago in New York. Yes, the ship was called the Mary Celeste, and it had left New York Harbor 8 days before Morehouse's own ship. The 2 captains had talked about their routes over wine. They were both heading to Europe. They had shaken hands and wished each other safe travels. Now, here was the Mary Celeste, drifting alone in the middle of the ocean with her sails half up and nobody at the wheel. Morehouse ordered his crew to get closer. As they pulled alongside the Mary Celeste, they called out. Nobody answered. The ship was completely silent except for the creaking of wood and the flapping of loose canvas. Morehouse sent his best men over in a small boat. They climbed up the side of the Mary Celeste and disappeared onto the deck. Minutes passed. Then one of the men appeared at the rail and shouted back words that made everyone's blood run cold. The ship was empty. Not a single person was on board. The boarding crew searched everywhere. They went below deck, opened every door, checked every corner. The captain's cabin still had his things in it. His wife's sewing machine sat on a table with thread still in it. Their little daughter's toys were scattered on the floor. In the galley, they found plates with food that had started to rot. Cups were still sitting out. The ship had 6 months' worth of food and water in storage. The cargo hold was full of 1,701 barrels of alcohol worth a lot of money. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been smashed or broken in a fight. The ship was perfectly fine. It could have sailed for months more. But everyone was gone. The crew found the ship's logbook, the daily record every captain keeps. They flipped to the last entry. November the 25th, 9 days ago. The captain had written down their position near the Azores, noted the weather, recorded their heading. Then the writing just stopped in the middle of a sentence. After that, blank pages. The navigation charts were laid out on the table like someone had been using them and then just walked away. They checked the lifeboats. One was missing. The ropes that had held it were cut, not broken. Someone had deliberately taken that boat and left the ship. But why? The Mary Celeste was not sinking. There were no holes in the hull. The pumps showed only 3.5 feet of water in the bottom, which was normal and not dangerous. There was no storm damage. The masts were fine. Most of the rigging was still good. This ship could have sailed all the way to Italy like it was supposed to. And Captain Morehouse knew the man who commanded this ship. Benjamin Briggs was honest and experienced. He had brought his wife and their 2-year-old daughter with him on this voyage. 7 crew members had sailed with them. 10 people total. All of them vanished. Morehouse walked through the empty captain's cabin and tried to understand. Briggs would never abandon his ship unless something terrified him. But what could scare an experienced captain so badly that he would put his wife and baby daughter into a tiny lifeboat in the middle of the ocean? On the deck, one of the crew found something else. The ship's compass was smashed. The wooden box that held it had been knocked out of place. Nearby lay a sounding rod, a tool used to measure how much water is in the hold. Someone had used it recently. But the measurements they got should not have made them panic. The ship was not in danger. Standing on that ghost ship in the middle of the Atlantic, Morehouse felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December wind. 10 people had made a choice. They had looked at their perfectly good ship and decided they would rather take their chances in a small boat on the open ocean. Something had gone terribly wrong. But looking around at the intact vessel, at the untouched cargo, at the half-eaten meals and sleeping quarters that looked like people had just stepped out for a moment, Morehouse could not figure out what that something was, and more disturbing than anything else was the question nobody could answer. If they left in the lifeboat, where did they go? The ocean was huge and empty. There was no land for hundreds of miles. Why would they leave the only safe place they had? Morehouse made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He ordered some of his crew to stay on the Mary Celeste and sail it to the nearest port. The two ships traveled together to Gibraltar, a British territory at the southern tip of Spain. When they arrived in December, Morehouse thought he would be rewarded for saving an abandoned ship. Instead, he walked into a nightmare. The British authorities immediately suspected him of murder. A man named Frederick Solly Flood was the Attorney General, the top legal official in Gibraltar. He took one look at the Mary Celeste and decided something criminal had happened. He accused Morehouse and his crew of killing everyone on board and then pretending to find the ship abandoned. The fact that Morehouse and Captain Briggs knew each other made it worse. Flood thought they had planned it together to steal the cargo and share the money. Morehouse tried to explain. He and Briggs were friends. They had families. There was no reason to hurt anyone. But Flood did not believe him. He ordered the Mary Celeste searched from top to bottom. Investigators went over every inch of the ship looking for proof of violence. They found very little. In the captain's cabin, under the bed, someone discovered a sword. It had dark stains on it. Flood got excited. He was sure it was blood. He sent it to be tested. Days later, the results came back. The stains were rust. Not blood, just rust from being stored in a damp place. The court hearings went on for weeks. Morehouse and his crew had to answer hundreds of questions. The first mate, it's a man named Oliver DeVoe, described what they found when they boarded the Mary Celeste. He talked about the wet mess below deck, about the captain's bed being soaked and not fit to sleep in, about the strange quietness of the whole ship. Another crew member, John Wright, gave exact details about the position of the sails, the amount of water in the hold, and the missing lifeboat. Flood kept pushing. He wanted to prove a crime had been committed, but the evidence kept not matching. If there had been a fight, where was the damage? If pirates had attacked, why did they not take the valuable alcohol? If the crew had mutinied against Captain Briggs, why would they also kidnap his wife and baby? And if Morehouse had killed everyone, where were the bodies? You cannot hide 10 bodies on a ship that small without leaving some trace. Slowly, other explanations started to come up. DeVoe mentioned something he had noticed. 9 of the 1,700 barrels of alcohol in the cargo hold showed signs of leakage. Not much, but some. Alcohol gives off fumes, strong fumes that can catch fire or even explode. Maybe, DeVoe suggested, those fumes had scared Captain Briggs. Maybe he thought the whole cargo was going to blow up. Maybe that is why he ordered everyone into the lifeboat. But that explanation had problems too. If Briggs was worried about an explosion, he could have opened the hatches to let the fumes out. The investigators found that the forward hatch had been open. So Briggs knew how to deal with fumes. Also, if he thought the ship might explode, why did he not take the navigation tools? A captain never leaves those behind. The sextant, the chronometer, it's the detailed charts, all the things needed to find your way across the ocean. They were all still in the cabin. If you were getting in a lifeboat to escape, you grab those items first. Briggs did not take them. The timeline made things even stranger. The last entry in the ship's log was November 25th. The Mary Celeste was found on December 4th. That meant the ship had been sailing itself for 9 days. During those 9 days, it had traveled about 400 miles east. With nobody steering, with the sails partly down and some rigging damaged, the ship had somehow kept moving in roughly the right direction. It had not crashed into anything. It had not sunk. It had just drifted along, perfectly fine, while the people who were supposed to be on it had vanished completely. Flood wanted to know about the ship's clock. It had stopped. The compass was broken. The binnacle, the stand that held the compass, had been knocked out of place with some force. What could do that? A big wave? But there were no records of storms in that area during late November. The weather had been mostly calm. A few crew members from other ships testified about conditions on the ocean during that time. Nothing unusual, no hurricanes, no giant waves, just normal Atlantic weather for late autumn. Then there was the sounding rod found lying on the deck. This was a long wooden stick with measurements marked on it. Sailors would lower it into the hold to check how deep the water was. Someone on the Mary Celeste had used this rod shortly before everyone disappeared. They measured 3.5 feet of water. That sounds like a lot, but for a ship that size, it was normal. Ships always have some water in the bottom. The pumps take care of it. 3.5 feet was not enough to sink the Mary Celeste or even to make it unsafe. So why had someone been checking? Had they gotten a bad reading? Had the pump seemed broken? Had something made them think the ship was sinking when it really was not? After 3 months of investigation and court hearings, Flood had to give up. He could not prove murder. He could not prove fraud. He could not prove anything except that a ship had been found empty and nobody knew why. The court awarded Morehouse and his crew salvage money for bringing the Mary Celeste to port, but only 1/6 of what the ship was worth. Normally, rescuers got half. The tiny payment was an insult. It showed that the court still suspected something bad, even if they could not prove it. The Mary Celeste was released back to its owners. Morehouse sailed away, his reputation damaged forever. People whispered that he was a liar, or worse, and the mystery got deeper instead of smaller. Because now, a new, horrible possibility emerged. If Captain Briggs and his crew had gotten into the lifeboat while they were near the Azores, and if they had tied that lifeboat to the Mary Celeste with a rope to stay close, and if that rope had somehow snapped, then they would have been left floating in the middle of the ocean with no way to catch up to their ship. They would have watched the Mary Celeste sail away from them, getting smaller and smaller on the horizon, carrying all their food, water, and tools until it disappeared. And then they would have been alone on the open Atlantic in a tiny boat with no supplies, no way to navigate, and no hope of rescue. The Mary Celeste became cursed, not by ghosts or magic, but by its own story. After the court case ended, the ship's owners tried to sell it. Nobody wanted to buy it. Insurance companies refused to cover it. Sailors refused to work on it. The ship that had survived everything the ocean could throw at it was destroyed by fear and rumor. Before all this happened, the Mary Celeste was just a normal trading ship. It had a normal history. It carried normal cargo. After December 1872, everything changed. People started calling it a ghost ship. Newspapers printed wild stories. Some said sea monsters had taken the crew. Others claimed aliens had abducted them. A few writers invented tales about bloody mutinies and pirate attacks, even though the evidence showed nothing like that had happened. The truth was strange enough, but people wanted their stories to be even stranger. The logical explanations kept fighting with the impossible ones. Scientists and sailors tried to figure it out using facts and reason. The alcohol fume theory was the most popular. Captain Briggs knew he was carrying a dangerous cargo. The barrels were made of red oak, which can leak. If enough fumes built up below deck, Briggs might have worried about a fire or explosion. He might have ordered everyone topside. He might have opened the hatches to vent the fumes. And if he saw or smelled something that made him think an explosion was about to happen any second, he might have ordered everyone into the lifeboat to get away from the ship quickly. But other experts pointed out problems with this idea. If you are afraid of explosion, you do not just sit in a lifeboat next to the ship. You row away as fast as possible, and once you are away, you watch the ship. If it does not explode after a few hours, you go back. The Mary Celeste never exploded. It kept sailing just fine for 9 more days. Why did Briggs not return? Another theory involved seaquakes. These are earthquakes that happen under the ocean. They can make the water suddenly rise and fall in strange ways. Maybe a seaquake hit the Mary Celeste. Maybe it made a loud noise or caused the ship to shake violently. Maybe Briggs thought the ship was breaking apart and ordered everyone to abandon it immediately. But if that happened, why was there no damage? Ships hit by seaquakes usually have cracked timbers or broken masts. The Mary Celeste was intact. Documents from the time tell the real story of how people reacted. The Gibraltar Chronicle newspaper wrote about the case in December 1872. They called it mysterious but did not jump to wild conclusions. Later, other papers were not so careful. In 1884, a writer named Arthur Conan Doyle, who would later create Sherlock Holmes, published a short story about the Mary Celeste. He changed the name slightly and invented a completely fake explanation involving murder. Many people read his story and thought it was true. The lies spread faster than the facts. Court records show how hard Solly Flood tried to make sense of it all. In one official document, he wrote that the more he investigated, the more confused he became. Everything pointed to something being wrong, but nothing pointed to what that something was. Yes, he wrote that it was one of those cases where you can feel the mystery getting bigger the more you learn. Captain Morehouse gave a statement that was recorded in the court files. He said he had known Captain Briggs for many years. He said Briggs was a good man who loved his family. Morehouse was certain that Briggs would never abandon his ship unless he absolutely had to save his life and the lives of his wife and daughter. Those words mattered because they came from someone who actually knew Briggs, not from strangers making guesses. The sensory details from the crew who boarded the Mary Celeste got more disturbing the more you thought about them. The smell below deck was damp and stale. The air felt wrong, like a house where nobody has lived for a long time. In the captain's cabin, the child's toys on the floor looked like a little girl had just been playing with them. The sewing machine had thread in it like Sarah Briggs had been making something and had stopped in the middle. In the galley, food had gone moldy on the plates. The stove was cold and dry, which meant nobody had cooked anything for at least a day or two before the ship was found. The whole vessel felt frozen in time, like everyone had just vanished in an instant. Strange things kept happening to people connected to the Mary Celeste. The ship was sold and resold many times over the next few years. Every owner lost money. Some went bankrupt. A few died in strange accidents. In 1885, 13 years after it was found empty, the Mary Celeste was deliberately run aground and wrecked off the coast of Haiti. Yes, the captain who did it was trying to commit insurance fraud. He loaded the ship with worthless cargo, insured it for a lot of money, then crashed it and tried to collect. He got caught and went to jail. The Mary Celeste, the ship that had survived being abandoned in the middle of the ocean, finally died in a stupid crime. But the worst consequence was what happened to the families. Benjamin Briggs' mother lived for 13 more years after her son disappeared. She died in 1885 without ever knowing what happened to him, to her daughter-in-law, Sarah, or to her granddaughter, Sophia. The families of the 7 crew members also never got answers. No bodies were ever found. No wreckage from a lifeboat ever washed up on any shore. It was like 10 people had simply been erased from existence. The most terrifying fact came from looking at all the evidence together. In 2007, a filmmaker named Anne McGregor studied old records at the Smithsonian Institution. She found documents that showed Captain Briggs had been worried about the alcohol fumes. His log entries in the days before everyone disappeared mentioned the fumes several times. He ordered the hatches opened for ventilation. He was dealing with the problem the right way. So what went wrong? One theory is that Briggs ordered everyone into the lifeboat as a precaution and tied the lifeboat to the ship with a rope so they could stay close but be safe if there was an explosion. If that rope broke, the ship would have sailed away from them. They would have watched it go, unable to catch up, and unable to do anything but float in a tiny boat in the middle of the endless Atlantic Ocean. That image is almost too horrible to think about, but it explains everything. It explains why the ship was fine, why they took the lifeboat, why they never came back, and why no bodies were ever found. The ocean is very big, and 10 people in a small boat would not last long. The case is officially closed. No crime was ever proven. The deaths of Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, Their daughter Sophia and the 7 crew members are listed as lost at sea, cause unknown. No bodies were recovered, no trial was ever held. The mystery is marked as solved by abandonment and presumed drowning, but nobody really believes that explains everything. The Mary Celeste changed how people think about the ocean. Before this, most sailors believed that if something bad happened at sea, you could usually figure out what it was. Storm damage, piracy, fire, sinking, these things left evidence. The Mary Celeste left nothing. It proved that sometimes people can just disappear and leave no trace at all. That idea scared people then, and it still scares people now. Over the past 150 years, more than 100 different theories have tried to explain what happened. Some are scientific and careful, others are wild and silly, but none of them answer every question. The alcohol fume theory is the most accepted, but it does not explain why experienced sailors would abandon a perfectly good ship and never try to return. The seaquake theory makes sense for why they might panic, but there is no record of seaquakes in that area at that time. Every explanation has holes in it. The Mary Celeste became famous in a way that Captain Briggs never could have imagined. Books were written about it. Movies were made. It became the most famous ghost ship in history, more famous than any ship that actually had ghosts. The name itself became a phrase people use when talking about places that are mysteriously empty. If you walk into a building that should have people in it but does not, you might say it is like the Mary Celeste. What happened to the people involved tells its own sad story. Captain David Morehouse, the man who found the abandoned ship, faced whispers and suspicion for the rest of his life. Some people always believed he had killed Briggs and the others, even though there was never any proof. He died in 1905 at the age of 66, his good name never fully cleared. Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General who pushed so hard to prove a crime, never solved the case. He retired in disgrace years later over other matters. His aggressive investigation of the Mary Celeste is now seen as an example of someone deciding guilt first and looking for evidence second. Sarah Briggs' family put up a memorial stone for her, Benjamin, and little Sophia. But there were no bodies to bury. The graves are empty. The 7 crew members also have no graves. Their families mourned people who simply vanished. That kind of loss, where you never know for sure what happened, is especially cruel. The ship itself was destroyed in 1885, wrecked on purpose for insurance fraud. Its remains are still underwater off the coast of Haiti. Divers have visited the wreck site. All that is left are broken timbers and metal pieces scattered on the ocean floor. The ship that survived abandonment, that sailed itself for 9 days across the Atlantic, that started one of history's greatest mysteries, ended up as garbage in shallow water. But there are things we still do not know, and probably never will know. Why did Captain Briggs not take his navigation instruments if he thought he might need the lifeboat for a long time? If the crew tied the lifeboat to the ship, what broke the rope? If they did not tie it, why not? If they were just going to float next to the ship for a few hours until the danger passed, why did they not bring more supplies? The ship had plenty of food and water. Why not grab some before getting in the lifeboat? And the biggest question of all remains. 10 people made a decision in a moment of fear. What did they see, hear, smell, or feel that made them so afraid that leaving a safe ship seemed like the better choice? The Mary Celeste is not alone. Since 1872, other ships have been found abandoned with no explanation. In 1921, the Carroll A. Deering was discovered run aground off North Carolina. The crew was gone. Food was cooking in the galley. In 1955, the Joyita was found drifting in the South Pacific, partially flooded but not sinking, with all 25 people missing. In 2007, the Cas-2 was found off the coast of Australia. The engine was running, the computers were on, a laptop was open, food was on the table, but the 3-man crew had vanished. These cases are called Mary Celeste situations now. The original mystery became the name for all the others that followed. And some mysteries have answers we just have not found yet. Others have answers we will never find because the evidence is gone forever. The Mary Celeste might be the second kind. The ocean keeps secrets well. Water does not remember. Waves wash away clues. Bodies sink or get eaten by fish. Wood rots. Rope dissolves. After enough time, there is nothing left to find. The Atlantic Ocean in 1872 was vast and empty in ways that are hard to imagine now. There were no satellites, no radio, no GPS. If you got lost out there, you were just lost. Nobody would ever know where you were. What we can learn from this is something about fear and how it makes us act. Captain Briggs was smart and experienced. He had sailed for years. He was not the kind of man to panic over nothing. But something made him panic. Something made him put his 2-year-old daughter into a small boat on the open ocean. Whatever that something was, it was real to him. It felt dangerous enough to risk everything. The fact that he was wrong, that the ship was actually fine, does not matter. In that moment, he believed his family would die if they stayed. So he made a choice. It was the wrong choice, but he did not know that. He was trying to save them. That is what makes this tragedy, and not just a mystery. There are fragments of a lifeboat somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Maybe they are buried in sand at the bottom. Maybe they rotted away decades ago. Maybe fish and waves scattered the pieces across hundreds of miles. Inside that lifeboat, if we could see it, there might be evidence of those final hours. Did they die quickly from a storm? Did they drift for days, dying slowly of thirst? Did they ever realize that the ship they abandoned was fine, that they had made a terrible mistake? We will never know. The ocean took them and kept them, and it will not give them back. The Mary Celeste asks a question that has no answer. How do you know when to run and when to stay? How do you make the right choice when you are scared and time is short and you have to protect the people you love? Captain Briggs made his choice on November 25, 1872. We are still trying to understand it. And somewhere out in the Atlantic, deeper than light can reach, 10 people rest in graves we cannot visit, victims of a danger we cannot name, lost to a mystery that will never be solved.